Servus, Matthias here, and this is Single Track, the first and original trail and mountain running podcast called Single Track. And I am the first and original Matthias Eichler podcasting from Olympia, Washington. A big thank you, danke und herzlich willkommen to all of our European listeners of Single Track. I very much appreciate it. In this episode, I sit down with Canadian Adam Lee calling in from Vancouver, BC. Adam invited me on his podcast a few weeks ago, and I'm returning the favor. His Substack newsletter and podcast is called Ultra Posty Thoughts in My Head, and you should totally subscribe to it for trail running tips and more. I linked this up in the show notes, of course, and also in your podcast player right now. Check it out right now. There should be a link under the cover art for you to click through and subscribe right away to Ultra Posty. It's a new service we've been providing for a while now, but I thought I would mention it again. Well, since we're talking about neat things, I want to give you a quick update on the La Sportiva Vento jacket I featured back on episode 230. It's a brand new windbreaker and light rain jacket by La Sportiva. It packs down small and it's reasonably priced. Well, the reason why I wanted to mention a jacket one more time is because seemingly the rain will never stop here in the Pacific Northwest, so you need a jacket. No, it is because the jacket has the best hood in the business, at least for my head. I've never had a rain jacket whose hood just stayed on without adjustment straps, without needing a cap underneath. The elastic in the front creates just enough tension without pulling that the hood, even in windy conditions, does its job, which is to stay on the head and cover my hair. I discovered this right after I posted the review last time and vowed to mention it. And on my run yesterday, I was reminded again as I ran through 3 different downpours. Yep, that hood is great. So if you are looking for a light windbreaker, not a full gore rainproof jacket, but a light jacket protecting you from short downpours or keeping the wind away from you, go check out the La Sportiva Vento jacket available at sportiva.com and directly through the link in, well, the show notes, of course. Father's Day is coming up, so if you're looking for gift ideas, that jacket is great. Also great for Father's Day is this, a recovery solve, specifically the CBD warming balm with arnica and menthol by Joshua Tree Skincare. Yes, that's a mouthful, but hear me out. As runners and adventurers, we all are sore after a tough workout or a big day in the mountains. We aim to minimize this by stretching, drinking the correct recovery drink, and buying new gear, of course. High time we take care of our bodies. We're not getting younger after all. So if you're sore after a workout and you tried all the things, don't stop doing them, but consider adding a massage salve to help speed up recovery. Rub this CBD warming balm into your sore and tired muscles, relax, and let your body recover and your muscles heal. Look, these type of skincare products are never cheap, but they last a long time and make really great gifts. So check out the full line of skincare products from Joshua Tree Skincare at JTreeLife. That's JTreelife.com and start recovering smarter and stay more relaxed. Joshua Tree Skincare, organic products for active lifestyle. And there's one more thing. Stay until the end of the episode for an announcement of a new project I've been working on. It'll be worth it, I promise. All right, let's dive into it. Here is Adam. Adam Lee, welcome to Single Track. Thank you so much for taking the time. How are you?
Matthias, thank you so much for having me. I'm really well today and so excited to be here with you.
And I hear that you have a very tough training ahead of you, so you were like excited to be on the microphone. So I can distract you or keep you from having to put on some shoes and get out there.
Yeah, you know, you're really getting in the way of my workout here today, Matthias. So I'll do my best to not talk too long.
No, I'll keep you, because if you don't talk long, I'll talk long. So to start our first question, you're up in BC. Do you have a special greeting? I always start my podcast by saying Servus, which is the Bavarian, Alpine, Austrian kind of greeting on the trail. So if you go hiking or running in that area of the Alps and you cross another hiker or someone, then you would say servus, servus, hello, right? It's basic. Do you have a specific greeting that is either Canadian or West Coast Canadian or British Columbian or Vancouverite?
That's a good question. And first of all, I have to clarify. Servus?
Servus, Servus, servus.
Servus.
Mhm.
Okay, I like that. I like that you started each time, but I haven't been able to actually hear it, so now I know the word. That's fantastic. I think up here, we just try and be polite and not scare people, but there's no real term or whatever. Mostly it's like a good morning.
But it is important, right? It is. I just learned about a new print magazine that I think it's called Hello, Hey, Hi, or something like that. And the reason why they have that greeting as the title of the magazine is because they're saying how important it is to greet each other on the trail. Right? Yeah, you don't want to scare,
Absolutely.
but sometimes if you don't say anything, you scare or startle people even more.
100%. I think there's always those kind of funny times too. It seems to happen where you'll come around a corner and you're coming up on. It's always two because they're talking, so they're not going to hear your footsteps, and you
Right.
always have that like, when do I greet them and how do I not scare them? And it's always they're going to jump.
I know. And nowadays, with headphones getting smaller and smaller, that is the other big thing, right? I mean, and
Yes.
I've been guilty of that. And I've had headphones in and listened to, I don't know, an amazing trail running podcast or something, and was completely in my thoughts. And somebody came around the corner, and I didn't anticipate them, right? Your peripheral awareness is gone.
That's it. You're in your own world.
Exactly. So, Adam, tell listeners a little bit more detail about where you're from and what you do up there.
Yeah, so I am from Vancouver, BC. I originally grew up in Ontario and moved out here 2009 with my wife Sheena, and was always kind of drawn to the mountains and the ocean. I did some mountain biking and that sort of stuff growing up in Ontario. So mountain you could put in air quotes if you wanted, but there was a love of the trails and that kind of thing. So getting out to the West Coast, I don't know if you've noticed out here, Matthias, but there's a lot of outdoor culture.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so it was easy to get involved there, and I started road running like a lot of people, and was given free entries into the local marathon, half marathon through work, and I thought that'd be a great way to meet people. Did that for a couple of years and kind of chased times, and some marketing or something like that came along, saw an advertisement for trail running, and the first time I went out on the trail, it was kind of kicked back to mountain biking growing up, and it was like, what? Why have I not been doing this the whole time? Like what was I thinking? And immediately, like your times you don't care about, and you're just out there cruising new trails and all that. So I'm not a born and bred West Coaster, but I'm definitely feeling at home here. And the trail running community is just so much fun. So that's sort of the short version of how I've ended up in the trail running community.
I mean, this is amazing, and we need to talk about Vancouver for a second, right? Because Vancouver is literally one of the coolest cities in the entire world. Is that
It's
what
pretty
brought you out
awesome.
there?
We ended up in Victoria for a few years because I had family there, and we came to Vancouver for the Olympics to check out an event. And because when we moved from Ontario, we both worked in television
Okay.
back there, so we had lots of friends coming out to work the games, and it was like we got to go meet everyone. And you can only imagine how much fun Vancouver is usually. And during the Olympics and this sort of fresh West Coast perspective, like we were just like, this is the greatest thing in the world. And so to experience that, we're like, we need to live there. And as soon as we lived here, we're like, this is home. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of days where I'm like, I hate this city because of this or that or whatever, sitting in traffic or that, whatever it may be. But then you get through that moment and you get to go play in the mountains and you get to go sit beside the ocean and you're like, all right, this isn't so bad, and eat at all the great places. And yeah, it's a wonderful place to be, and it's really hard to leave.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, I love Vancouver. It's one of my favorite places to go visit, and I think, as you're saying, talking about traffic, I think one of the few downsides Vancouver has is that it's a West Coast city, so it was developed after after public transportation or after the car was already established, and so everything was built car centric as opposed to
Hmm.
building a proper public transportation network. I was up for the Olympics too for a day, and I mean, I'm flabbergasted at some of the public trains that they put in just for the Olympics. They've actually taken back out. I'm like, why? But let's not get into politics. It is one of the other big cool things about this city is you're talking about outdoor culture. I mean, if you think globally, I don't know that there are many multi-million mega cities that are so close to the mountains.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you one off the top of my head in quite the same unique way, because it's so funny. Like, you go back on a trail run, and there's this end of the line general store in North Van Lynn Valley, super common spot to hang out, start from. And if you're just a fly on the wall and listening to the conversations and what people are training for, you're like, it's the best, because you can be doing the most epic thing ever and feel like you're, the tiniest human being just in this parking lot, because there's 7 people doing something way crazier than you are.
Well, that is like one of the best atmospheres, right? That's what I love about the mountain towns in the Alps, where you can sit drinking a cappuccino in the afternoon and you get people walking by with mountaineering boots and ice axes on their backs, right? And you know they just came from put down from doing some kind of crazy glacier climb, right? And you just sit there eating your croissant, right? That's what's amazing. And in Vancouver, you got that in a gigantic city. Amazing. But let's talk about you a little bit. You said you found trails. Give listeners a little bit of a couple highlights. What were some of your favorite moments on trails?
Yeah, totally. It's always fun to reminisce and talk about the fish getting slightly bigger every year,
Right?
after you caught it. So I think I would definitely have to shout out the Coast Mountain Trail. It was Coast Mountain Trail running. It's Coast Mountain Trail series. It's Coast Mountain Trail running now. That's Gary Robbins and Jeff Langford's course up here. And I didn't know, it was 2015. I guess I had no idea about any ultra runners, trail runners, anything like that. There was the Cap Crusher is what the name of the race was, and it was billed as Canada's toughest 8K. And I just thought, I love it because I immediately want to sign up, and I also immediately know that there's probably no other 8Ks with any elevation in the country anyway, so there's no bar to jump over as far as it being the toughest race, right? But I just loved the marketing. So I did that race, and that's, again, it was 8K. It was over and under an hour, and just the atmosphere of that day, hanging out at the finish line for the awards, and Gary going through the awards, and how inclusive everything was. And I'm kind of old school in that when if I go to an event, whether it be it's from playing baseball, frankly. You thank the umpires at the end of the game, whatever you're doing. So you thank someone, whoever set that day up for you. So I found Gary. I said, thank you very much. And I just made a habit of introducing myself to him when I'd see him the next time, because he's very personable, and he starts chatting with you too. I thought he'd be busy and not have time for a conversation. Again, just because he's the race director, and I assumed as much, but he was very engaging. And so I'd find him before races after that. And that's sort of what built my love of that series, was just the vibe from the very top is it's all about giving each other time and having fun with each other and including everyone. There's no I don't like to slag on the road running either, because I think it's awesome and it's its own thing, but it's just very insular, I feel like. Whereas the trail running, it threw me off how everybody had time to chat and that kind of thing right away. It was such a different vibe. So I loved that. It felt like a party. And that's probably how my love of trail running started, was that very first race. and definitely a highlight.
If you if you talk about the entire series, have you run all his races?
I have run them all, but not all distances.
Sure, sure. No, absolutely. That would take a lot. Which one's been your favorite so far?
Oh,
I
it's
know,
that's
right?
right. Like that's because Whistler's super fun because it's a party weekend up there, and
Mhm.
you kind of feel like you're taking over Whistler as the runners. You know, it's there for you, and it's a fun vibe up there. So that's super fun.
What distance did you run, Whistler?
I've done the 25 up there. So I was there the year that it was, I forget the original course, but we got rerouted because of the grizzly
Hmm.
bears.
That was the time when Gary still had the most of the course on, I think, the northern side of the highway, right? And I think he
Yes.
sort of abandoned that altogether because of
Yes.
the challenging logistics and bears and everything else.
Yeah, like I don't think the bears were the first challenge that they had
No, I
faced
think
with
that there
that
were
course.
several challenges up on that
Yeah.
side of the course.
Yeah, so I ran it. It was the first year they did comfortably numb the trail, and I think that's
Mhm.
what they stick to now for that
Yes.
run. And that was pretty funny actually too, because I was running with a good friend, Scotty Hurst, and him and his, I think they were married at the time. Him and his wife were up there with my wife Sheena and I, and we had plans of meeting at the finish line, of course, and going out for breakfast and everything afterwards. And the race had been rerouted so close to race day that we didn't get a chance to adjust what time they should meet us at the finish line. So we blasted through because they took a lot of elevation off with the course changes. Like
Mhm.
it did change it in a fairly dramatic way. So we finished, they were still having mimosas at their first breakfast. We're like, we're done.
Hello. That's fantastic.
It's time for our mimosas, you know? Um, so yeah, I really liked the Whistler one. And I know Squamish isn't part of that series. I know it's its own standing race or
Yeah.
whatever, but that's definitely got a spot in my heart because that was the first 50K I did. And then last year I did the 50-50, and that's the most challenging one I've done. So I've got a lot of time and love for Squamish, even though I hate Squamish.
Oh, wait, what do you hate about Squamish?
Oh, I'm kidding. I just mean that I'm still traumatized from the 22 hours in the rain.
Oh, you did it that fall when they had to change the dates because of COVID, right? And then it was
Yes.
a fall date, and then it was a brutal, brutal downpour, right?
An atmospheric river. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Atmospheric river, right? We hadn't heard this word until like 3 years ago, and now we have atmospheric rivers at our races.
Right.
Damn.
I think the weather. We should all take a page out of the Weather Network's marketing because I think they really get things nailed down. You know, they introduce these phrases into our lexicon. And
Oh
we
man.
take everything they say seriously, and they don't have to actually follow through. It's perfect.
Yeah, I'd been signed up for a Whistler race, but I had to like lapse my registration because I couldn't make it up there. I think Whistler has huge potential for Gary in being one of those classic big mountain running festival weekends, right?
Yeah, it was, and you probably know this better than I will. It was supposed to be in the World Series, was it not?
I think it's still well, I know that one of the shorter distances is still part of the Golden Trail series.
That's what it is, a Golden Trail Series.
Hmm.
Sorry.
No, yeah, yeah, exactly. But I think even beyond that, right? Because one of the big challenges that many of our great races have is that some of them are in the middle of nowhere, and you go out there, and there is no motivation for spectators to be out there at the same time, right? Because you're like
Hmm.
driving 4 hours down a forest road into sort of the middle of nowhere. But Whistler is that perfect hub where you could bring your friends and family up, and you add some vacation time to the weekend, and you meet afterwards in the pool, and people could potentially see you halfway through the course as you're coming back through Blackcomb if you're running one of the 100K or 100-mile distances, right? I mean, it sort of has that potential of being a UTMB course, or being a course that has people actually standing on the side of the trail while you're racing.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. It's such a good vibe up there. They could run wild with that. I know like trail running's a challenge for sure in getting spectators, but I see these things from around the world and there are people that get out and watch them. So there's ways to do it.
I mean, you just need the people and you need the accessibility, right? I mean, I think you do need the culture a little bit too. I mean,
Mhm.
I've ran Monte Rosa, Ultra Tour Monte Rosa last year. I DNF, but that's like realistically only 5 valleys over from Chamonix, and there was no one on the course. So it is a different atmosphere. It is in a different country. It is a much smaller race, different race direction, and so I think there is something. If you think Tour de France, I think the French, they are nutty enough that they love standing for hours on the side of a trail to cheer on these endurance athletes, right? I think there is that sort of understanding wherein I think other cultures don't quite have that.
That's a lot of patience to show.
I know, right? I mean, it's
Right?
an
Like,
endurance sport in itself.
right? Totally. I think that's what I always say. Like, Sheena will help me out from time to time, like crewing training runs and all that. And like, I think they're working way harder than us. Like we get to cruise through the bush. It's beautiful. You hang out, not stressing about getting to places and hanging out and taking the abuse of the whole day. Never mind standing on the side of the trail to cheer for someone all day.
Yeah. No, I think you were mentioning about timing things right? I mean, if you are support and you have to potentially hop from aid station to aid station and stuff, I think that's a big challenge for the crew for sure.
Stressful.
It's stressful. All right, so let's switch gear a bit. Part of the reason why you're on the show is not just because you can tell me how beautiful Vancouver is, because I know it already. No, you actually started a few months ago a newsletter called Ultra Posty, and it's a Substack newsletter. So you jumped on the newsletter craziness that sort of it kind of came up. I think you're the only like ultra running new. Well, I mean, I guess there are a couple newsletters, but yours is a little bit unique. And tell listeners a little bit about your newsletter, about your product. What is it?
Yes, so I started the newsletter. It's called Ultra Posty Thoughts in My Head. And that sort of tailed off as we were just talking about Squamish 50/50. I just had time to kind of work on something in the trail running sphere. I've done some writing and worked in media in the past. So writing and then kind of getting into the podcast was a natural fit. And trail running I really love. And then kind of looking at what's out there already and then into my wheelhouse, as we talked about a little bit before we started recording. I'm not someone that's out there following the sport at a high level or anything like that, and I'm not a coach. I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm just like a lot of everyone else, if you will, that just really loves to trail run. And I wanted to figure out how I could fit in and offer value to people as opposed to just kind of spewing out garbage.
All right.
No,
Is this your criticism to all the other newsletters out there?
no, definitely
Harsh.
not.
No, you're Canadian. You would never. I know.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Way too polite to do that.
Exactly.
I only mean that for me to get on a soapbox and to tell you anything that you should be doing would be considered garbage. So
Yes. Okay, I get you. To position yourself as an expert or a coach, it wouldn't be appropriate, if you will.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And I do not want people to think that either. That's sort of my fear. I'm not trying to push myself out there as an expert. So what I'm trying to do through the newsletter is and the podcast is to find experts or people with a lot more knowledge and share their knowledge. And then on the writing side, I've always liked to write and be creative. So I've been finding ways of sort of engaging with people. One of my favorite ones that I did so far was just I got a bunch of people to tell me why they love trail running and some trail running experiences, and then I kind of wrote them all together as though we were out for like a group run. And so it's been kind of fun to kind of pull from my skills and what I like to do and then grab the knowledge of what others like to do and what they have. And I feel that that's where the value comes from. And that's why you want to stop by and actually read and participate in the media that I'm putting out. Is I think what my goal is to make it like the trail running community, which is very inclusive and chatty and engaging, and just kind of put that through the computer so you can kind of feel like you're still hanging out.
I do very much hear you, and I think that is a very good encapsulation of what the trail running community is all about. So, for people who have not heard of you before, we put the link to your newsletter in the show notes, especially for people who are looking for a sort of a different media in consuming, because news, I think before podcasts came up, all the trail media was YouTube, right? I mean, I think YouTube was the
Mm-hmm.
biggest sort of vehicle. Everybody had a GoPro. Everybody had a little
Mm-hmm.
shaky cam from their race, and they put some music over it, and they called it, the greatest bucket list experience and stuff. And I did that too.
Absolutely.
And that's fun, but again, it requires from a consumer, it requires you to have the time to watch a video, right? You can't digest it bit by bit. If you want to watch a video of a particular race that somebody did that you might have signed up, I mean, you can see some great imagery possibly, but you don't really get good information out of. A written article would help you more, right? um, and you can't search a video, you can't search a podcast either. So having articles is an interesting way of sort of giving people some other form of getting connected to the trail running community. And with that, you've also done a podcast, and I've been on your podcast. That's how we sort of connected. And obviously, everybody should listen to my episode because it's the greatest. No,
Of
of
course.
course. Your podcast is also very unique. Speak a little bit about your podcast.
And so yeah, podcasts sort of the same idea. I have one episode, so I can't say they're all under 15 minutes because I have one that I went over. It was very early on and I hadn't nailed down my format yet. So I think that was about 17 minutes. But they're all going to be 15 or less. They have been. And I try and find an interesting guest. I've had, like a hypnotherapist, a trail running photographer, a couple of coaches, yourself as a race director, and another race director have joined me. Just people who are involved in the community, um, that maybe you just didn't have a chance to hear from yourself before, like yourself as a race director. Like, we're out there taking part in the events. We love them. We have such a great time. Say hi or thanks and high fives and all that, but you don't get to hear about the person behind the event and that kind of thing. So that's sort of what the podcast is about. And then the reason it's 15 minutes or less is mostly got to do with my own attention span, to be perfectly honest. I have a hard time focusing on the longer podcasts. I'll have to pause them and consume them in a few different sessions because I can't commit to an hour or an hour and a half usually. And again, it's just my attention span. Like, okay, I'm done with this for a bit. I got to read about something else now for a while or whatever. So the 15 minutes is kind of in my wheelhouse as far as paying attention. But also, I like the challenge of moderating it and keeping it to 15 minutes and getting actual value out of that time too. Because just because something's 15 minutes long doesn't mean when you listen to it, you'll get anything out of it.
No, that's true, but it is interesting because I think most other podcasts like this one here, I try to go as long as possible. In theory, I'm not artificially trying to make it long, but I'm thinking,
Mhm.
well, people listen to the podcast while they're out running, and if they're running longer than 15 minutes, so you might
Mhm.
as well go long, right? That's sort of the theory, right? But there's also another thought, which is I find sometimes you need, especially if you are talking to someone you perhaps have never met before. So I find you need a little bit of time to have some light questions back and forth
Mhm.
before you get to the meat of it, right? Before you really make a connection with a person, and sometimes I feel like you need that time.
I completely appreciate that, and it's definitely part of the challenge. I'm a big, smiley, and approachable person from generally, and right from the get go, when someone gets on there, I try to be as upbeat and relaxed too, so that they can get into things as easily as possible. And as you know, I send questions ahead of
Hmm.
time too, so you know that what's coming. Because it works for both of us too, right? Like if you chat with me for 10 to 12 minutes, I'm sure that you'd like to actually say something too, and I'd like to get something out of you. So it's nice to have that little bit of prep and kind of get into it that way. I do find, um, not that I have to stick to the scripted questions by any means, but it becomes a challenge when someone gives you a great answer and you're like, ooh, I want to go down that road that they
Hmm.
just brought up a little bit,
Hmm.
right? So sometimes you just have to give up on that, and then other times it's like, okay, we're going to go down that road, and I'm going to get rid of these scripted questions I had, because that's going to be far more entertaining to listen to. It's all about learning for myself what's more entertaining in the end, and I think honestly most of the time it's going down that road,
Yeah.
because yeah.
Well, and I mean, there's a meta conversation in there, right? I think if you would be, well, I mean, if one would have the time and the money in this, I mean, we're mainly doing this as a labor of love in some respects.
Hmm.
Um, we could probably record 4 hours of conversation and edit the good ones down, right? I'm trying to study as somebody who's asking questions. I'm trying to study in Oprah Winfrey. Not really, but sometimes the questions are clearly edited in a way that she picks the ones that had the good answers and
Yes,
everything
of
else,
course.
right? And in the podcast, we are sort of free flowing a little bit.
That's the power of being the interviewer too, right? Like you have every word that you use in your question actually has a lot of power in the way that someone's going to respond. It's really interesting.
It is for sure, and it's something that I never considered really as something that I wanted to do. I always wanted to have more of a conversation as a podcast. Like I
Right?
didn't really want to interview. Of course, you need to interview in order to introduce your guest to the show, and you need to find a way of yourself actually getting to know that person because, right? I mean, we're all doing it for free. We can't have 3 meetings beforehand
Of
to
course.
acquaint
Yeah.
ourselves, right? Before we actually get to a place, right? But I think there's also a big challenge because if you only stay in the introductory questions, then you it almost the product gets a little bit repetitive, right? There needs
Yep.
to be this, like, what makes this particular conversation unique.
You got to get into the bones eventually. Otherwise, yeah, you're just kind of looking at the postcard the whole time.
Exactly. So let's get into the bones.
All right.
So one of the interesting side challenges for myself in doing what I'm doing is that you want to tell amazing stories of people doing really cool things. I think that is the most inspirational thing. But there's also this other thing, which is we are observing and living and breathing in a sport, in a hobby, in a world, in a genre where things are happening and we are observing. So we are not just doing stuff ourselves. Hey, how did your training go yesterday? But we are also like observing. Oh, look, there is a brand new company entering the market. There is a new race series. There is a new media product. There is somebody retiring, somebody changing, right? I mean, we sort of see how things change. And with you, as somebody who doesn't just run, but you're actually creating a product yourself, I'd love to have a conversation around what do we see
Hmm.
in this culture, in this sport that we call trail running? What are the big trends? What are we observing? And I know
Hmm.
that you said that you are not one of those like um, people who follows all the top runners religiously all the time, but I'm curious what you see from your side.
Yeah, totally. And I was excited to have this conversation with you too, because we're so close geographically. So I'm curious to know what your experience is down there compared to mine here, even in Vancouver. And of course, we're going to be speaking anecdotally,
Absolutely, of
um,
course.
but that's the fun of it all. Because I think that the sport is in a great place, as far as what what I see is like here participation levels are always going up. Races are selling out sooner and sooner, and not only is that happening, but the women in the sport, the participation amounts are increasing too. Like it's getting more and more close to equal up here for a lot of our big events too. You know, like I think Squamish 50 last year was, I'm gonna mess this up, but I want to say it was only like a few percentage points, like 54 to 46 or something like
Wow.
that. Like it's, yeah, it's fantastic. And then so there's this, and again, this is getting super anecdotal now because you're talking to some guy who's talking about the run group that he goes out with. But there are these women that show up. It's the Solomon Trail Lab, it's called, and they're brand new to the sport, and they're so strong, and then they're signing up for like their first races and they're finishing on the podium. Like I think the sport is still so young, and it's in such a great place in that respect that I am so excited to see where it goes. I think there will be growing pains because of course there are, and I don't even know what that will be necessarily. Like I can't tell you what that's going to mean. I'm sure costs are going to go up in certain ways, but I think if the sport starts to get expensive in that way, there will be things that move in to find the lower cost because I think there's enough interest overall. And again, I think that's just because it's not just one group of people that's joining the sport more and more. What do you think about where things are at?
I would have agreed with everything you've said just before COVID hit. I mean, that's when I started,
Mm.
being a race director because I saw the opportunity. I saw that races were selling out, that tons of people were getting into the sport, that there is, and this is another observation, I think, and this is, I had mentioned this to you before and I couldn't find the article, but Killian once wrote an article sort of saying we call this sport ultra trail running, but it is such a broad aspect. And
Hmm.
how do we define what is an endurance race versus a trail race? You were saying you've done a race that was 8K, right? I think there's an opportunity to actually come below and create so much more smaller, easier events, easier from a difficulty, right? Not everything
Hmm.
has to be a ultra distance in order to have people truly experience trail.
Hmm.
And because of that, right? Because we are not just having to push the far limits, but we are actually able to sort of create a whole bunch of foundation in the 5 to 25K in whatever 40K distance, right? I think
Hmm.
there's a huge opportunity. And I've always seen this, but then COVID hit, and I think we are in a sort of like exhaustive, hesitant, bruised, confused space, right? And we are sort of slowly coming back out of that.
Yes, totally. I feel like up here it's been everyone's coming out a little bit more this year and getting a little bit more comfortable out on the trails, and yeah, the numbers are kind of ramping back up because you're right, COVID did knock everything on its ass. Like
Yeah.
that's what happens, right?
And I did, and I do know, again, anecdotally, I didn't research it, but from a kind of hearing through the grapevine, race directors are struggling trying to find volunteers. Like people are excited to race again and they're signing up, but we're trying because we, for 2 years, couldn't do anything. We sort of, that's my interpretation of it. We try to do the things that we want to do, and we haven't really come back to this. Oh, I also should give back to the community, right? Because we're
Hmm.
still hesitant about how much time we actually want to hang out at the aid stations with other people,
Yeah,
right?
that's true. That's interesting. And you know what? Even pre-COVID up here, and again, this is one case, but I know Mountain Equipment Co-op (MEC), and they've gone through some ownership stuff too, and all that could be part of all that mess. But they had stopped some local events too. They used to do some really cool like $15 races, and they stopped doing those because they were having a hard time drawing up volunteer interest. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I think, like you said, people are probably just a little bit weary of kind of doing the aid station thing and not really thinking that part through, because you're right. How are we gonna go play and race if we don't have people to run the aid stations?
Yeah. So there's a racing part, but what I've always been very strong about, and I don't know how you even feel personally as from an athlete and how you spend your time. One of the beautiful things about our sport is that there's a whole aspect of experiencing the mountains and the trails that have nothing to do with signing up for races, and that's beyond just training for races, right? I mean, you can go for FKTs, you can create adventure routes on your own, you can go and do famous routes, runs, loops that give you an insane amount of satisfaction, but it had nothing to do with races.
Yeah, absolutely. There's like, I mean, usually it's based because I have a race coming up, but that's just because I usually sign up for a race. No matter what, if you're going out for a long run on the Saturday or the Sunday, it doesn't even have to be a long run. You go out and you spend a couple hours in the bush, like you don't care what the event is, even if you are signed up. That day is awesome and special because you've been out in the bush for 2 hours and you saw some cool bridges or a waterfall, or I don't know. Trail running's so funny because you can get in with a group of other adults and sit there and stare at like a couple of ferns and talk about the difference in the greens, and everyone's equally engaged and into the conversation. Like it's wonderful out there. I don't know. That as I think you're alluding to, that will never change. That doesn't matter the state of trail running at the top or the bottom. Like if you're out there with a friend running through the trails, that's a great day.
Yeah. But for you personally, would you say that these runs out there, they fit in to your training plan once your races for the year are set? Like you don't really have you ever attempted an FKT or looked at a route that has never been done before or something? Is that something you think about?
Not really. I have a good running friend who's very adventurous and always kind of looking into crazy routes and that kind of thing. And I love it. I love chatting with him. That's what we run and talk about, is just like what kind of craziness he's up to. But for myself, I'm like most of us too, where it's like, you look at things like I'm never going to challenge for the top, even at my best. And as much as I'd love to think that I can do it, I don't think I'm up there. And to try and find a route unique enough or something like that, like that's not really where my brain goes, not really where my heart is. I'd rather spend that time on a route I already know with a good friend talking about the stupid routes that he wants to do, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. So you enjoy the time spending outside, but you do prepare. You're saying you do have to do interval training after this, so you have a training plan. So there is some time involved preparing of what you need to do once you're wearing your shoes.
Yes.
It's just not poring over maps and route finding and making plans.
Yeah, exactly. And I part of it too is, as I said, I only moved to Vancouver in 2012. So I moved to West Coast 2009. We moved to Vancouver 2012 after the Olympics. So I've only been here for a decade, and I know that's a long time, but I've only been trail running since 2015, which cuts into the decade. And as you can imagine, the trail network here is just so wild and vast and amazing. Like I don't have to dream up crazy routes to go explore a new trail to me that's amazing.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's that, and frankly too, I worked, as I said, I worked in media. I worked as a television news editor for CTV. And frankly, I was a little bit scarred to go into the bush because we'd always have like these North Shore rescue stories and stuff. And you just, it was, and I'd have all the essentials and all that too, but I was like, oh, I can't go off the trail because I've wrote the note and left it in my car, because often I'd be by myself too. And it's like, these are the trails I'm going on, so I can't stray from that. And I kind of got into this like safety net of like, you have to plan your route and tell people where you're going to be and don't stray off of that and stick to the regular ones. And I should be actually a little bit more adventurous, and it's something I'm actually trying to work on too, is to explore a little bit more and get out of my comfort zone, but in a safe and knowledgeable way, so as to not end up on the news.
Well, I mean, I love both sides of our sports, right? I love races. Well, I'm a race director, but I love the races because it allows people to experience adventure and
Mhm.
on challenging terrain without having to do all of the homework of how do you keep yourself safe? What should I take with me? What's the weather look like, right? I mean, realistically, you were signed up for Squadron 5050 doing an atmospheric river. If you would have done your own mountain adventure and had it planned for that weekend, you would have not done it, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Um, and so there's a good and a bad thing to it. On one side, you've got a great story to tell, right? On the other side, if you would have done your own mountain adventure, you would have been smarter. But I do.
That's
Go ahead.
I was gonna say that's the fun of the group, right? If you have another dummy in front of you, and I'm like, all right, well, let's go.
It's true, but it is something interesting. I listen to a lot of mountaineering podcasts, and I do find that side of our sport incredibly fascinating. I do
Mhm.
love this idea of people dreaming up their own routes, and it can be something extremely challenging, or it can be something very obvious. It doesn't have to be um, the most difficult thing that nobody has ever done before, right? I mean, you
Right.
could come up with a variation of a particular route that works for you, that is not necessarily completely bushwhacking off the beaten path, getting eaten by bears, right?
Or cougars, like your last guest. I was listening to the podcast before I jumped on there. Oh my gosh, that was quite the story.
I know. I'm a little bit worried because we've had cougars fairly close to town now these last few months, and I wonder if, well, I wonder if our insane logging, because the
Mm.
prices of timber has gone up so much, that our insane logging is driving cougars out of their habitats and closer to town, because these encounters are a little bit more frequent. But again, that's anecdotally. I haven't actually done the research to see if that is truly more frequently.
Who knows? More cougars is never good.
It is never good, especially if the cougars come to us, right? I mean,
Yes,
if it
yes,
means more cougars, that means perhaps we are going to crazier places. So, I mean, that's where
that's fair.
there should be. You're a very positive guy. Do you see any negative sides in our sport? Do you see anything worrying, anything concerning, anything where you're like, well, this could go down a wrong path if we don't pay attention, and I don't know who the we is?
I, it's so hard to kind of pick on trail running in that respect, because like the sustainability of the sport, I think maybe is one where we could kind of um, do better. And I think a lot of companies and people in general are, but I know there's so much appetite, and I'm included, don't get me wrong. And like, I want to go here and do this race and go there and do that race. And, the airplane trips are maybe not the greatest and that kind of thing, especially for someone like myself who lives in Vancouver. Like, I don't need to travel around the world to run in like these insanely beautiful, crazy places. I know that's not always the point either. But if I'm gonna like pick on something in a negative, I suppose that's the only thing that I would worry about. But I know, like, and I apologize for continuously picking on Gary's races here, but I know that they've gone like completely carbon neutral, and they're like planting trees for every runner and that stuff. So there's answers out there in that, in a positive way. Um, I guess it's almost like jaded from capitalism too, right? Like, growth just seems to destroy everything at a point. So but that's just, like you said, we're not getting into politics, and we're not going to go down that road. That's being super pessimistic. I really think that the sport is in a great spot overall, as far as where it could sit in the psyche of outdoor athletes and that kind of thing. The people that love the sport are truly passionate about it. They don't waver. It seems like you can go out and find these runners and all that. at any time, and then the newer runners I find are finding a welcoming spot to land. And then lastly, and I know this is a little inside baseball or whatever you want to say, but I know like the demographic of trail runners and ultra runners overall, I forget what it is, but it's also like a high percentage of people who make like 100K plus a year. Like there's money in this industry, so I think it's going to explode in what you can spend your money on, but I don't necessarily know how useful all of that will be.
Well, I mean, that's something that worries me a little bit because I feel like if mm, if there's a line of product that's going to get introduced that is at a price point that is being sold as truly having advantages over other product
Like the
over the
whole run shoe thing right now with the road, is it the vapor flies that are making everyone like 4% faster than every
I
record
mean
before?
something a little bit like that, right? Because it's not so much me personally that I'm like, oh, now I have to spend $400 as opposed to $150 on a pair of shoes. It becomes then less inclusive and equitable,
Big
right?
time.
I think I'm a little bit worried that if this sport continues to professionalize itself and people are chasing that it a baseline will be set that will be not as welcoming as the basic baseline that running always had, which is if you already have a pair of shorts, find a pair of sneakers, go and run, right? It allows that level of participation, and I hope that can continue to embrace that part of our sport.
Absolutely. I think this is maybe along the lines of what you were talking about with Killian and the ultra and trail difference and that kind of thing too. Because I think trail running overall is safe. I think we are kind of chasing these bigger distances. You're right. I think the smaller ones are going away. I think there once, and this is a lot of I think, but once the COVID weirdness levels out even more and people come out that much more regularly and get more comfortable with it, and we kind of get back to where it was as far as signups, um, there's enough of an appetite there for the smaller races that there will be people that move into that space. Um, that's my hope with growth anyway, and that's what happens in industry overall usually, right? Is cost goes up, and then someone will move in and find a way to take the market that's been abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those trail running and those shorter, but and here so and that's the catch, is the trail running and the shorter races and all that will sort of still exist, and hopefully it can be incubated enough where people feel welcome and they want to keep going out, because the ultra side of things, if it's like any other professional sport, like, kids buy hockey sticks because people in the NHL use them. People buy baseball bats because people in the MLB use them. Like whatever you want to use, it's because it comes from the highest. So I'm sure that that's where we're going to get the gear from, the $400 shoes. And like you said, hopefully there are companies that will move into that lower echelon as well, because ultra running, I think, is not an inclusive sport. You
Mm-hmm.
don't just need a pair of shoes to run 50Ks. You know, like there is gear, there is signups, there is, even if you have a race in your hometown, so you can train and do all that. Like, it's not cheap,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to go through quite a bit of gear and just the amount of training. Like,
Yeah, the training aspect, right, is
right?
a big aspect too. Not everybody can dedicate that amount of time to a sport, to a pastime, right?
Exactly. I love trail running. I've loved the ultras I've been able to do and train for them. I'm very cognizant of the fact that it's a very privileged thing to do.
I mean, I love your perspective, and I don't know if it's well. Let's just not say it's just because you're Canadian. Let's say because it's you. No, I appreciate it because I think over here, down here, I often am surrounded by people who um, very much look at running, trail running through the lens of of the professional world.
Mm-hmm.
What is Jim Walmsley doing? What is Courtney Dawater doing? And you know how it is. I mean, our podcasts sit in the sports category,
Mm-hmm.
but the sports category by is overrun by people doing podcasts about professional sports. They're not actually participating themselves, right? They are
Mm-hmm.
armchair quarterbacks. They're sitting in there just talking about a sport. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I sometimes am surrounded by people who they are trail runners themselves, but as they're talking, their world, their mind share is sort of occupied with what the pros are doing. It's not
Mm-hmm.
what they are doing. Their sphere of influence are the three runners around them, but they talk about the big the big pros.
Mm-hmm. It's easy to want to emulate that, right? Like that makes a lot of sense, and to have that, if and that's part of what's out there too as far as coverage, right? Like you're gonna probably read and see media about those super famous professional runners and that kind of thing too. So I don't know. I like we've already said, I'm kind of more in my own bubble in that way, and the people that I get to get out and train with and run with and meet in that way, I love following their stories. And again, like this run group that I was telling you about, I all these people I run with end up on the podiums and all these races, and through my newsletter I've got to reach people, in the US, but also like in Europe, and um, some in Africa as well, and just like South America too. Yeah, all over the world anyway. But yeah, it's just been fun to hear the takes. And then the coolest thing too is when you're reading like people's favorite trail running moments or whatever from all over the world, how similar they are. Like everyone's is different, but everyone's the same, and it kind of makes it makes you realize a trail runner is probably a trail runner is probably a trail runner. We all just love it for what it is, and I think it's more pure than like yours because we're involved in it. I don't know, like
Mm-hmm.
people love football because they get to watch it and maybe they play once in a while too, but like it's I don't know, it's not the same. It's yeah,
It isn't
we
the same, and it is sort of the core. What makes our sport on a high level? What makes our sport so unique that we get to run the same race or the same distance of a race, or even actually stand on the starting line with the greatest ultra runners in the
yes.
world, right? You can't do that with almost every other sport. Like, I mean,
Oh, it's
I
so
can love
unique.
soccer, but I'm not going to play soccer with. Now I have to mention like somebody that's not like Ronaldo or whatever. Now I have to say Thomas Müller. There we go, right? And let's name a German, right? I mean, but you know what I mean, right? I mean, you get to
Yes.
play your sport, and you get to play it without the need of a specific. I mean, you can. You're in Canada. Ice hockey is your frame of reference, right? I mean, if the lakes freeze over, then everybody plays ice hockey. But in order to play it, you have to go to a um, stadium hall, whatever. What's
Arena.
arena? Thank you. Right. Well, and that often then means you probably have to join a club or a team or
Mm,
something like that, right? So the idea of just playing it doesn't really exist for most of our other sports, and that's one of the beautiful things about trail running, right?
yeah, absolutely. And even if, as you said, even if you're not running, you can just show up and like there's like, oh, there's that person I love who does all this crazy stuff and is just hanging out. Like it's super unique in that respect.
So, um, are we telling the right stories as the media? Are there more stories that we should be telling? Because sometimes it feels like we're just chasing the professional runners in our storytelling. How do we
So
get to better stories, to more
this and
diverse stories?
right, this is what I'm curious about, and it's such a topic du jour. It's awesome. Everyone's like, what do we do with trail running? Where do we go? How does it professionalize? What's it look like next? How do we tell the stories? I'm so I'm going to turn it around on you actually for a quick question. What do you want to see out of the top of the sport? Would you like something where it's like Saturday, Super Saturday, or whatever? Like, do you want something that you can consume on TV, on whatever, however you stream it, like a live event? Is that something that interests you?
I mean, it really doesn't. I think the internet for me has killed live events
Hmm.
because, like, on demand, I would watch a summary of something, maybe, but I barely watch any live sport. Used to be, live sport would used to be a thing, but I'm such an on demand person now that I don't know. Do I enjoy catching a glimpse of some of the big races, some of the big events? Absolutely. But I try to spend I try to spend very little solo time in front of a TV. For me,
Hmm.
it's family time, and then we watch movies together. I'm not really into the professional sports scene much.
That's totally fair, and like I'm a big Blue Jays fan. I'm a sucker. I'll watch most of the games, but I have it on in the background too. I'm not like completely devoted to it, but I see a lot of that. Just this is what was bridging into my thought is just I've seen a lot of how do we make the coverage interesting? How do we get people's eyes on the sport? And I just don't. I don't have the appetite for it personally. Like I don't think you can like I don't think you can make Killian so interesting dominating a race because it's still just someone running through the trail. Like I need to be there to experience that. I don't, and I read about the race there this past weekend after you told me about it in the previous email, and I heard that they were like a second apart for miles and miles and miles and miles. That's fascinating. That's great, but it still would be terribly boring television. Do you know what I
Yeah, I
mean?
mean, it
Like,
was a 3.5 hour race at Zegema, and Killian and the second place runner, whose name I don't even remember, they basically traded leads for 2/3 of the race and eventually in the
which is
downhill,
awesome.
which is awesome. No, it made absolutely for an incredible experience for the people who were there, but it was 3.5 hours, right? I mean, it's a little
Right.
bit. I don't know. Perhaps Formula One is an interesting comparison, right? Where the cars don't really have a chance of overtaking, and sometimes you have to have been there to watch like that one pit stop that changes the entire
Yep.
race, right? And if you
But
don't,
it's timed at least, right? Like F1 races are 90 minutes, are they not?
no, it's not timed, it's loops. Usually it's like, they have to run like 50 loops or something like that, right?
Okay, I thought it was, and then I thought I had tuned in recently and saw a timer. I don't know. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Off tangent aside.
You're right. No, absolutely. But what I'm saying is, right, sort of, I remember watching Formula One years ago when Michael Schumacher, the German, was driving, and you're spending 3 hour 4 hours on a race with like pre and post coverage and stuff, right? But then
Hmm.
very few, unless there are accidents, cars blow up or whatever, there's very few actual changes. There's very few like, wow, something really happened, right?
Right. Yeah. It's all not predetermined, but pretty close to predetermined.
Yeah. I
My
mean,
my.
there is something fascinating about our sport with creating these events and sort of creating these visuals and allowing people to have these experiences, and they're beautiful if they're running around Mont Blanc. I mean, that is something that is visually stunning, right?
Yes.
Um, but for me, I've always been somebody who's more interested in the story after, if somebody did a cool video, a cool story about their experience running the Grand Canyon or running um,
Right.
a special project. And if that their special project was that race, then I'm interested in it. But I mean, Runner 395 equally has an interesting story, right?
Yes. Absolutely. I can't recall where I read this, and I apologize for that. But someone had mentioned recently that trail running needs what F1 had with that Netflix series and a reality show based around something. And I would totally get into that. Like if there was a reality show about one of the big races and it going on and some runners leading up to it, like, yeah, that would be fantastic. I think that would be fun media to consume and a great way to introduce runners to everyday people because people will binge watch. I mean, look at all the fans F1 grew. Those people weren't race fans going in. They grew to be race fans through the series. So there's potential to make fans like that. I think you could find there are characters in this sport. There's no doubt about that. You could And like you said, runner 395 is just as interesting as runner number one. You don't need to just tune in to the high level pros when you're doing a series like that. You could find runner 395 and have them equally featured.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I know I Run Far has always, and there's a logistics, and I'm not trying to criticize them, but they've always done like, okay, we follow the top 10 runners from maybe Western stage, aid station, right? But we can't stay for the whole race. But it would be interesting to sort of, as a media team, go to one of those big races and essentially draw a number and say, okay,
Yeah,
bib number 495, we follow you for the race, and we give coverage of bib number 495.
that would be super fun.
Right, and to basically like, okay, we have these 5, 10 runners, and we pull bibs out of the hat beforehand, and obviously we ask them if they agree to it over, right? But we
Yes,
essentially
yes.
follow their race, and you would get a completely different coverage and experience based
Yeah,
on that, right?
absolutely. Even somewhere like, to because now you just got the juices flowing there. You could, someone in yourself, if you had the race director, you could have someone ahead of time too. So you've got pre-interviews set up with them and they're ready for race day, like, but yeah, that would be fun because this sport, as you said too, is so much about the back of the pack, the middle of the pack. Like the high level is what gets the media attention, like you said, and that's what drives everything. But there's so much more to it. And like you said, it's because we can toe the same start line at the same time. It's not like the, and we'll go back to the arena, but it's not like the Friday night, midnight hockey guys. They're never going to step on the same ice at the same time as the guys at the high level, but in running, it happens.
Yeah, I like it. Cool. Anything else? Have we covered anything else? Anything gear? I mean, we talked about the expensive shoes. Have you had any gear that has been life changing for you? Any new
I,
gear?
I, I trained with poles last year when I was training for Squamish because I had originally signed up for Whistler
Hmm.
and the permits got pulled and everything. So, but I had run with the poles for a few months before all that had happened. And poles are, that's a whole, oh yeah, that's a difference maker. Holy smokes. That was really cool. And getting like practicing with them and training with them and getting better with them and like, on the way down, even like kind of using them on berms and stuff was super fun. So that was a game changer. And I have to unapologetically give a shout out to Black Diamond as well, because I broke one with less than 100 kilometers on it and they replaced it right away, sent them out, no questions at all. And they were the carbon ones. So they really didn't have to do that. They could have broke just because, but it was really great customer service.
Fantastic. Yeah, I do think that poles make a big difference. I mean, I'm European. I've been doing the pole thing. I've been okay with doing the pole thing for years.
Right.
I'm not afraid of poles. I know that you couldn't use them at Squamish, right? Squamish
Yes.
is no poles, but Whistler is, poles are okay.
Yes, that's
Okay,
right. Because it was the 100K, I was 110, and I don't know if all distances are, but the 110 you definitely were allowed to use them.
cool, awesome. Well, what's on the race calendar? What's on the summer calendar for you coming up?
Well, I'll bridge a couple of different things because the newsletter side, I'm really excited. I've got a feature coming out the first day of summer. I have got a few hours actually left, but by the time we record, it won't be out. I've got at least 30 people who've given me their best trail running tips from 7 different countries so far, and I'm going to put that out first day of summer. That's going to be a resource more aimed at like newer trail runners because I have a good personal friend, Simon, who's just started trail running, and it inspired me to put this together. So that's the sort of the thing that I'm looking forward to on the newsletter. The other thing I'm looking forward to is there's a Gulf island here called Galliano Island. It's an awesome little one. There's plenty of them, but it means a lot to me because we have friends who let us stay there. And over the years, I've learned a lot of the trails there, and I'm involved with the trail running community a little bit more there. So I've got a feature coming out on Galliano Island on why everyone should visit and run there. I'm really excited for that. That's going to come out in the next couple of weeks, right around the beginning of summer as well. And then on the run side, I'm Super stoked to be running Buck and Hell, another Gary course. I'm doing the relay with a good friend, Chris. He's having his first child in August, so we're going to run the relay together at the end of July, and we're really sinking ourselves into it. That's why I've got intervals to go run, because we want to send him into parenthood with the best possible outcome. So that's the only race I've got officially on the calendar. I said this year to my wife, after training for 9 months for the 50-50 last year, that this year would be a lot more relaxed. So that's sort of been the plan here, which I've really enjoyed too. It's just been fun to kind of go out and run. Mm-hmm. And I've got a race to look forward to, but I'm hoping to put something on the calendar in the fall. I don't know what. I have no idea what the idea is. I'm just keep telling myself that something will land in my lap that makes sense, and I'm hoping it'll be like a 50, but I don't know. I'm just really looking forward to Buck and Hell, and I have the relay is is one person does the climb and one person does the descent, and okay. I've got the descent half, so 24K with 700 meters of elevation, but 1,700 meters of descending.
Nice.
Yes.
Bucking Hell got a new course layout, right? It now starts at the top. So does that mean you will have the first leg?
Yes, that's right. We're starting and finishing at the top for the first time, which is going to be so much fun, because Deep Cove is beautiful and awesome, but it is a pain in the butt to park. And I know, as we were talking, more challenges. I know every year that they had to deal with the locals just hating on how early it was and taking over. And I can't blame people either. It is what it is. They're at the top of the mountain now. It's going to be so much more fun. It's going to be like an actual party for the run.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Well, Adam, thank you so much. Before we go, tell listeners where they can find you, connect with you, sign up for your newsletter, listen to a podcast, all of the above.
Thank you so much for taking the time today, Matthias. I really appreciated being on. It was so much fun. People can find me. Just Google Ultra Posty. You can find me pretty much anywhere that you consume your media, Twitter, Instagram. I am on Substack. It's ultraposty.substack.com, but just Google Ultra Posty. You can find me wherever you take in stuff. I'm even on LinkedIn, and I post on YouTube because apparently people like to listen to their podcasts on YouTube, so it's there too. You can find me. Thank you, Matthias.
All right. Thanks for staying until the end of the episode of Single Track, and thanks for your curiosity. Here's what I've been working on, and I do hope you check it out. I launched a new website. Yeah, that's what designers like me do. It's called Electric Cable Car. More on the name in a bit. Here's what it is, and here's what I'm trying to do. I want to create a space to comment on the evolution of mountain sports, and specifically trail ultra and mountain running. We've seen incredible growth in that area in the last few years, and I, a keen observer and huge fan of the sport, wanted a place to collect what I find and share and what I think about it all. Lots of people and organizations are tweeting, Insta posting, sharing news, their changes, happenings on various channels, and I am following all of them. I won't be posting a giant fire hose of information, but I will post the pieces I consider most crucial and share them here with a few of my observations, trying to link them together and somehow make sense of it all. It's meant as a commentary, more than an exhaustive collection of everything. I'm looking for trends. As a designer, the bug caught me last week, and I had to sit down and furiously, over the course of 48 hours, design the brand, the logo, and develop the site. It's all still new, smells of fresh paint and sawdust. So go check it out at electriccablecar.com and let me know what you think. So what's in the name? For me, the cable car is the visual representation of the development of mountain regions. Some hate them, but I truly, truly love these cable cars, or gondolas to some. They're marketing eye candy for many vacation regions. Once a destination has a cable car, you bet it will be on every postcard and in every marketing video. They're modern, swift, environmentally sensible modes of mass transportation, and they just look so damn cool. Cable cars enable and unlock the higher alpine regions for many who couldn't otherwise get there. Riding them gives one a new perspective, quite literally. You get to be on top of a mountain. And that's the goal of this project of mine. Get you a new perspective, inspire and inform. What you can expect are short updates posted multiple times a week whenever news breaks, whenever I find an interesting link worth sharing, whenever there's a story worth commenting on. So, go check out Electric Cable Car. That's at electriccablecar.com. And that's it, my friends.